Hello, welcome and thank you for coming. We're so glad that you're here and taking on this big responsibility to sign up to be a foster parent. We hope that you find this training helpful. And again, thank you for doing your part in our village.
It takes a village to raise a village, so we really appreciate it. And if you have any questions, you're always welcome to come have a chat with our staff.
There is currently a need for emergency short-term and long-term foster families. So please consider opening up your heart and your home so children could stay connected to their community, their culture, their values, and their traditions.
You know, we were essentially, and still are essentially, a village people with that approach to life. And when you have that approach, then you realize that you're dependent on other human beings and on your environment and all the things in your environment, and you have to work in concert with that. What we're trying to accomplish essentially is setting up a judicial system and an infrastructure for our communities that works for our communities. If you've done something wrong, let's sort it out so that you can do something to give back and be back in community and hold your head up. And that's basically it. It's not about me proving you did it or not. You know if you did it. And if you did, what's the way back from that?
As a minority, we make up less than 2% of the population. 500 years ago, we was 100% of the population. Our women are murdered and raped on a higher percentage per capita than any other race. Our men are actually incarcerated more than any other race. When you see those statistics, we're not in there anywhere. And this type of system absolutely considers us and makes us visible again. You know, we've been invisible for a long time. And we have to live in two worlds here. We have to live in the modern world, and we have to try to carry forward our traditions. And this type of legal system that considers the cultural, not just the legal. Whereas, like I said, I go to county court, they see my long hair, they see my dark skin, and I don't have a chance. I've been there, I've dealt with them, and even though when I'm right, I'm still wrong, you see. Our case in there took about 7 minutes to deal with, and whereas if it had been a county court case, we'd have had to go back 5 or 8 times, and here it was just a quick, let's discuss it, and that sounds good, and we'll try it out, and if it doesn't work, we'll revisit it, and you know, and that really helps.
I think that, you know, for a long time, there hasn't been trust here because of government issues and, you know, of things that, you know, were said and done in the past. And so, you know, I think Abby has the right approach with people. She doesn't sit up on the bench and doesn't have a robe on. She gets in there. I think people right away they're at ease, and she continually preaches the piece about being responsible for what we do.
You know, we've been given a great gift to be here in this place because it's a beautiful place to be. The river has given us much. You know, we came upon a difficult period with the invasion, and a lot of bad things happened at that, and we picked up some bad habits, and we need to rid ourselves of those habits and move forward in a positive fashion, you know, and take care of this place as we are meant to do.
The Natamer Yurok foster parent training is 3 modules. This is the first of the three. So in this module, we're going to review the historical and federal context of child welfare within tribal communities, as well as discuss the Yurok tribe's decades-long effort to implement their own child welfare system, including an overview of child welfare processes. In Module 2, we're going to review the Yurok Tribal Child Welfare and Behavioral Health Department structure, purpose, policies, and services. And finally, in Module 3, we will review the rights, roles, and responsibilities of a foster parent, what you can expect when a child is placed with you, and what supports are available to help you along the way. So this is Module 1. We'll do the historical and federal context of child welfare within tribal communities and specifically within the Yurok tribe. To understand more about child welfare in tribal communities, we're also needing to look at sort of the general history of tribal communities in California. And so we present this video, The History of Native California. It does focus on local tribal communities in Northern California.
For California Indian history specifically, I think it's important for people to know that California has always been a populous place. It's home right now to 109 to 111 tribes, but back then you're talking about tribes everywhere. There is no empty space of wilderness that exists in this place that we currently call California. The way you know that there were California Indians everywhere is that every place had a name. There was not mountain or a field or a region that there wasn't a tribe who had already named it. For the sciences, I think that the land bridge theory has always been sort of a first point of knowledge about Native people. But there have been new studies that have shown that there was humans in this side of the Americas over 100,000 years ago, which would mean that that is around the same amount of time in which they say people were sort of first leaving Africa. And so we are asking people to complicate how they understand who we are as Indigenous peoples here. What we say is we're from this place.
And that's a real and true belief that we have. We are a part of the land, and the land is us, and we didn't migrate from some other place. We've always been there.
We've always been a part of our land, and not above it, not below it, but equal to, and we have our role. Our roles come from that engagement and come from seeing what needs to be done to make things the best way that they can be.
So all of this is very important for people to understand, because I think sometimes they think Californian people are here, but they're not really doing much with the space. There's so much evidence of like agriculture. There's evidence of large areas in which they're tending to. There's evidence of ways in which they're shaping what we now think of the natural landscape. And then colonization happens. Most California scholars, they call it invasion. So we're being invaded.
When Cabrillo was first on one of his ships in 1500s, burning of the land is what actually gave away people on that land. That was like the first thing that, colonizers saw, was our traditional burnings of the lands.
You're talking about 3 waves of destruction. From the start of these waves, there's not really a time period in which California Indians can recover from what's happening to them. So the first wave of destruction is the Spanish mission system. They build the first mission in San Diego. There's 21 missions that they build in total. This is Father Junipero Serra. And they're bringing people into the missions in the hopes that they can create this labor force to be able to establish this extension of Spain. The mission system is effectively an enslavement system of California Indian people. The missionaries bring along with them Spanish soldiers. The soldiers are written about in these records as being perpetrators of sexual violence, not only against women, but also children. Junipero Serra actually talks about that in his journals. He's like, they are sexually assaulting women and children in front of people. And when people try to stop them, they get shot. I mean, it's a very violent type of situation. The mission system sort of stops around San Francisco. And so up here in Northern California, what they say about us is we were contacted relatively late in the sort of colonization cycle. We had contact with some explorers who had come through, people that were looking mostly for gold. And at a point, they find gold. And this is where you get these sort of like massive influx of the gold rush.
And it just came like overnight, and it came in hard. And life just changed drastically and just immediately in a lot of ways for California people.
They're not here so that they can set up a colony or so that they can establish a labor force. They want gold. They will kill whoever is in the way. They will take apart whatever needs to be taken apart. They'll do whatever it takes. The thing about the gold rush that people don't think about is that it was actually an environmental destruction as well. And then on top of that, they are setting up a political system and a state system of laws and governance that will legalize the genocide that they want to commit against California Indian people.
Our first Lieutenant Governor, Peter Burnett, saw this huge population of Indians in the state. And so he's the one that, charged the war of extermination on the California Indians. And we lost, probably around 80% of our total population in just a short period of years.
The early settlers wanted the resources. They wanted what would make them rich faster. But instead of asking the tribe to help them or assist them, they said, well, since the tribe probably won't just give it to us, we're just going to wipe them out, we're going to massacre them, we're going to take everything for ourselves.
Each region of California is allowed to set their own sort of what are we going to pay for a scalp or a head. But when you look at advertisements, what you see is that they're advertising them at things like $5 a head and 25 cents per scalp. The first year that they do this, they pay $1 million. The state of California says that it has paid $1 million for killing Indian people. The second year they do it, it's $1 million. In this region, every single tribe in this region would have some kind of stories about the violence that came out of the gold rush. My great-grandfather, his family is from Kadu country. His great uncle his mom had lived through the gold rush, and he was born sort of like at the tail end of this period of time. And he would always say to my mother, remember, granddaughter, you're here because some miner was a bad shot. Like, that's how close it is to who we are.
When modern contact, we had to forget about all our relations. We had to forget about all the sciences. We had to forget about all the philosophies. We had to forget about everything that was ingrained from us for thousands of years to a shattered existence.
They would take your kids from your family and take them to boarding schools. And then similarly, you were not to practice your cultures. You're not to practice your traditions. You're supposed to practice, I hate to say it this way, the white man's religion. We're going to Christianize you. You're going to follow our God.
I know that I'm a product of forced assimilation. I know I was stripped of some of the smartest information a human being could have. And I know I don't have that now. But I know it's attainable over time. And we're on the right path.
There's all these great moments of Native people making sure that they were trying to hold on to things, like fighting back and making plans for the future. It's palpable in Humboldt County.
The Native American community, and especially the Weats and the surrounding tribes, were put through a lot. It wasn't just the Weats, it was Yurok, Hoopa, we were all put through a lot during the early years. Here we are, we're growing, we're becoming a stronger nations, we're working together with each other to create a positive thing. And not only us working with each other's sister tribes, we're working with the cities, the governments that surround us, the schools, HSU, to make this more positive.
Humboldt State University is within the Aboriginal territory of the Wiyot people. And then we have several other large tribes around here, the three largest in California, the Karuk, the Yurok, and the Hoopa. So being that we are in the backyard of three of the largest tribes, we can draw off and partner with some of our local tribes to bring that extra educational component to our STEM and natural resource students. Here at the Indian Natural Resource Science and Engineering Program and Diversity in STEM, we go by Intercept Plus. Our services generally provide navigational suggestions to students, assisting them navigate the College of Natural Resources and Sciences. We often are enriching that experience with extracurricular activities coming from an Indigenous perspective. So bringing up our ancestors' practices and techniques of managing landscapes, melding them or braiding them in with the scientific method and innovative technologies.
In Native Studies, we're doing a sort of broad spectrum of what it's like to learn from Indigenous peoples and cultures and knowledges so that we can build a better world, build a better way of knowing. It's about how we learn with and from Native people instead of disciplines historically that have focused on the study of Native American people. My paternal grandmother was one of the founders of the Indian Tribal Education Personnel Program, ITEP, back in the late 60s and early 70s. Her and a bunch of other mothers and grandmothers, they were the ones that kind of started a lot of our other community programs, our healthcare programs, our education programs. I always think it's a pretty amazing story because a lot of those women, her included, had attended boarding schools. And for those women to come back from that and still understand that we needed health and we needed education and we needed a strong community.
When you talk about the Indian Tribal Educational Personnel Program and United Indian Health Services having these women with moxie, they come from a generation of women who have been having to just hold that strength for such a long time. And part of the work as tribal people is how do we go back and tap into that, because that's always there. We come from a long line of those folks who are moving forward and have had to keep their dignity, keep their pride. And although it hurts, we're still doing that work. That's what I try to tap in for the young people, tribal people in particular, but also for non-Indian students to hear that too. It's not all historical trauma and then we're gone. No, it's historical trauma. We're still here and we're not going anywhere. We're still learning, we're still enduring.
In addition to knowing about our local tribal communities' history generally, we also need to understand the unique history of tribal peoples with systems that have caused harm through practices that targeted tribal children for removal and placement outside of their communities. The following film provides an overview of some of these harmful historical policies and practices.
I was adopted by a white missionary couple.
I was adopted.
Immediately placed for adoption.
I was in foster care with one family for 18 years. They were white.
My parents loved us, and I understand that, but at the same time,
they took the idea that they were saving
us from ourselves.
Being saved, and I should be grateful for the life that I've been given, because any child on the reservation would give anything to live as I was living.
They took us away from our mom. They came marching right in and literally took us and thousands of other children from their home.
It's a way to eradicate us. And to go to a nation's children is one of the sure ways to do that.
The U.S. has a long and brutal legacy of attempting to eradicate Native Americans. For centuries, they colonized Native American lands and murdered their populations. They forced them west and pushed them into small, confined patches of land. But Native Americans resisted. A Board of Indian Commissioners report said, instead of dying out under the light and contact of civilization, the Indian population is steadily increasing. And that was an obstacle to total American expansion. So the U.S. found a new solution to absorb and assimilate them. It all started with an experiment and a man named Richard Henry Pratt.
He had in his charge some prisoners of war, and he taught these men how to speak English, how to read and write, and how to do labor. He dressed them in military uniforms and basically ran an assimilation experiment. And then he took his results to the federal government and said, they're capable of being civilized. So he was able to get this project funded.
In 1879, the government funded Pratt's project, the first ever off-reservation boarding school for Native American children. His motto was to kill the Indian and save the man. What started there at the Carlisle Indian Industrial School was nothing short of genocide, disguised as American education. Children were forcibly taken from reservations and placed into the school, hundreds, even thousands of miles away from their families. They were stripped of their traditional clothing, their hair was cut short. They were given new names and forbidden from speaking their native languages.
To take our children and to indoctrinate them into Western society, to take away their identity as Indigenous peoples, their tribal identity. I think it's one of the most effective and insidious ways that the U.S. did do harm to Indigenous peoples here, because it targeted our children, our most vulnerable. And they tried to make us ashamed for being Indian, and they tried to make us something other than Indian.
There are also accounts of mental, physical, and sexual abuse, of forced manual labor, neglect, starvation, and death.
My great-grandfather went to Carlisle, and nobody in my family ever talked about it. So if you Google Indian boarding schools, the majority of the pictures that you will see will be actually from Carlisle. Colonel Pratt created propaganda. He hired a photographer to create those before and after photos to show that his experiment was working. So it was, intentional propaganda.
And it worked. The Carlisle model of education swept the country and led to the creation of over 350 boarding schools to assimilate Native American children.
On the one hand, we have the Navajo as we find him in the desert. Few of these boys and girls have ever seen a white man.
Hi, I'm Nicole Hockley from Sandy Hook Promise. I know this is hard to hear, but it's important. The shooter who murdered my son carried an AR-15 into an elementary school and killed 26 people in approximately 4 minutes. In those 4 minutes, he was able to shoot 154 rounds. 5 of those bullets hit my 6-year-old son, Dylan, and in an instant, my boy was gone. Right now, Congress is considering legislation to make purchasing assault weapons illegal. This is important and will save a lot of lives. It could have saved the life of my son. So please sign the petition and demand Congress take action against assault weapons. Help us save lives today. Thank you.
Notion has been the centerpiece of my workflow. It's quite literally an extension of my brain. I can take notes, create folders, manage tasks, projects, set goals, and build products. It's so customizable, you can tailor it to fit your team or your own needs, not to mention it's beautifully designed. From being a student to a creator and now running a small business, the world is moving digital, and remote work and remote school are becoming the norm. We need solutions for digital collaboration and organization to stay productive, especially if we're in different time zones. And this is exactly why I use Notion. Notion is an all-in-one digital workspace for your entire team or just for yourself. And the best part, it's completely free. You can sign up using the link in the description or somewhere on screen here and start taking control of your personal productivity.
Yet, through the agencies of the government, they are being rapidly brought from their state of comparative savagery and barbarism to one of civilization.
In 1900, there were about 20,000 Native American children in these schools. By 1925, that number more than tripled. Families that refused to send their kids to these schools faced consequences like incarceration at Alcatraz or the withholding of food rations. Some parents who did lose their children to these schools even camped outside to be close to them. Many students ran away. Some found ways to hold on to their languages and cultures. Others, though, could no longer communicate with family members. And some never returned home at all. By stripping the children of their Native American identities, the US government had found a way to disconnect them from their lands. And that was part of the US strategy. During the same era in which thousands of children were sent away to boarding schools, a number of US policies infringed on their tribal lands back home. In less than 5 decades, 2/3 of Native American lands had been taken away.
The whole thing was purposeful. And the fact that it has been buried in the history books and not acknowledged is also intentional. And in fact, the same tactics were used in New Zealand, Australia, Canada. All of these countries have acknowledged, apologized, or reconciled in some way, except for the United States.
Over time, the brutality of boarding schools started to surface. And after a 1928 report detailed the horrific conditions at some schools, many began to close. In the 1960s, Indigenous activism rose alongside the civil rights movement. And by the 1970s, that activism forced more schools to shut down. The government handed over control of the remaining boarding schools to tribes to be run in partnership with the Bureau of Indian Affairs. But just as the boarding school era started fading, another assimilation project took shape: adoption. The main goal of this pilot project was to stimulate the adoption of American Indian children to primarily non-Indian adoptive homes. They claimed it was to promote the adoption of the forgotten child, but it was essentially a continuation of the boarding school assimilation tactics. And the strategy came with a financial advantage for the government too. Adoption was cheaper than running boarding schools. But first, adoption officials had to sell white America on the idea of adopting Native American children. Feature stories like this one in Good Housekeeping marketed them to white families. They were described as unwanted, and adoption gave them a chance at new lives. In the end, their media campaign worked. White families wanted Indian adoption. But the problem was, many of these children were not orphans that nobody wanted. They were kids often ripped apart from families that wanted to keep them.
You still will hear stories today of people, my age, older, saying, I remember as a child, the social worker was coming and people would hide their children
On reservations, social workers used catch-all phrases like child neglect or unfit parenting as evidence for removal, but their criteria was often questionable. Some accounts describe children being taken away for living with too many family members in the same household.
An extended family is a big thing for Native people. And that means being judged for being in a house that's overcrowded. So it's always whiteness is the standard for success. And everything else is judged by that standard.
Get fast relief of your worst allergy symptoms, including nasal congestion, with powerful Claritin D, so you can breathe better. Feel the clarity and make today the most wonderful time of the year. Claritin D.
By the 1960s, about 1 in 4 Native children were living apart from their families. The official Indian Adoption Project placed 395 Native American children into mostly white homes, but it was just one of many in an era of Native American adoptions. Other state agencies and private religious organizations began increasingly making placements for Native American children too.
My mother giving me up was a white person telling her if she didn't, she would never see her other kids again.
In one of the documents I have, it's addressed to my biological father, Victor Fox, that he was trying to look us up to get a hold of us. But Hennepin County wrote, Daniel and Douglas are adapting very well in their new family. This was totally, it was a false statement.
When you're adopted, you know you're missing something. I think I've likened it to having like when someone has like a 500-piece puzzle and they have all the pieces to make this pretty picture except one.
My adoptive mother was not well, verbally, physically, and sexually, and spiritually abusive. So by the time I was 14, I started drinking. 15, drugs were added, and I became an addict to numb. I didn't realize I was numbing pain.
I tried suicide, tried slicing my wrist one time.
Children were taken and believed like I believed for a long time that there was something wrong with me versus something wrong with the system.
The Indian Adoption Project was considered a success by the people who set it in motion. Officials claimed, generally speaking, we believe the Indian people have accepted the adoption of their children by Caucasian families and have been pleased to learn the protection afforded these children. But the truth was unsettling.
These hearings on Indian children's welfare is now in session.
Well, I was pregnant with Bobby, and the welfare kept coming over there and asking me if I'd give him up for adoption.
Before he was even born?
Yeah. They picked up my children and placed them in a foster home. And I think that they were abused in a foster home.
4 years after Native people organized in this Senate hearing, Congress passed the Indian Child Welfare Act, known as ICWA.
It gives tribes a place at the table in court.
States would be required to provide services to families to prevent removal of an Indian child. And in case removal was necessary, they would have to try to keep the child with extended family or another Native American family.
Without our relatives, we cease to exist. So with Native people, part of our wealth is in our family. It's in who we're connected to.
But the legacy of family separation in Native communities has been difficult to fully undo. Today, Native American children are 4 times more likely to be placed in foster care than white children, even when their families have similar presenting problems. In these cases, ICWA is often the best legal protection they have, and it's been under attack repeatedly.
A young girl ripped from her foster family because of the Indian Children Welfare Act.
White adoptive families intent on keeping Native American children have tried to do away with the act. and they're often backed by conservative organizations.
The Indian Child Welfare Act was dealt a blow earlier this month.
The subject of a lawsuit issued on Tuesday by the Goldwater Institute, arguing that preferences given to American Indian families to adopt Indian children is unconstitutional and discriminates based on race.
It's a way for these industries, these very powerful industries, to try to attack what Indian identity is.
Wanting to overturn ICLA is connected to everything about who we are as a nation. So if we don't have any protections for our families, and if we don't have protections for our treaties, then we have no more Indians.
We've been under attack. We're going to continue to be under attack. And we have to just keep fighting.
It's in our DNA to survive.
We are nations that pre-exist European contact, and we are still here.
In addition to knowing more about the history, specifically how it impacted tribal children and families, we want to share more about the child welfare system in general and how it has developed in the United States. So the child welfare system really informally started with religious organizations developing orphanages in the 1800s, and primarily to provide for children whose parents had died. But you move on. So in the mid-1800s, charitable organizations began engaging in what was termed the orphan train movement. They were claiming to save children from neglectful parents. More than 250,000 children were shipped from the East Coast to the Midwest. But in many cases, the children were not abandoned, but simply the children of immigrants. And the children who were shipped across the United States to the Midwest were really sent and used as slave labor in Midwestern farms. For Native American children, the first removals and placements were really into these Bureau of Indian Affairs boarding schools, the first of which was established in 1860. The declared intention of these schools was to assimilate Native children into mainstream American culture. Many of the schools were run by religious organizations that sought to Christianize Native children. And for most of the children, removal from their parents was involuntary. Information continues to be revealed that children were abused and neglected in these schools. They were stripped of their traditional languages and practices, and some passed away. And they're just uncovering all of this further information about how many children actually did pass away in these schools. In 1935, the federal government developed the first sort of grants and regulations for state-run foster care programs. One of the regulations included that homes had to be inspected prior to the placement of children. And then moving into the late 50s through the late 60s, as boarding schools for Native children were beginning to be shut down, the Child Welfare League of America and the Bureau of Indian Affairs began what was called the Indian Adoption Project, which actively sought the removal of Native children from their families and placement with non-Native families, as you saw in the film that was just shown. So moving into the 1960s and 70s, tribal leaders and families really petitioned Congress to stop the harmful practices of boarding schools, biased state child welfare systems, and programs like the Indian Adoption Project. This activism led to the passage of the Indian Child Welfare Act when Congress found that more than 1/4 of all Native children had been removed from their families and placed in non-Native homes. So when the Indian Child Welfare Act was passed in 1978, Congress really did find that and declare that there is no resource that is more vital to the continued existence and integrity of Indian tribes than their children. So when Congress passed the Indian Child Welfare Act, they really did talk about the intention of the act was meant to protect the best interests of Indian children and Indian tribes, to prevent the breakup of Indian families, to maintain the citizenry of tribes, and to really remedy those historical policies that you've just seen in the film and that were discussed here that led to the disproportionate removal of Indian children from their families and communities. Part of ICWA's protections is really allowing tribes to know when their children are involved in state child welfare systems, to intervene in those cases, and to be involved in all aspects of decision-making when an eligible or enrolled citizen child is involved in a child welfare case. So since the passage of the Indian Child Welfare Act, you know, the mainstream US child welfare system has continued to develop with the passage of different regulations and funding. So starting in 1980, the Adoption Assistance and Child Welfare Act was passed by Congress, and this added what's now called the Title IV-E portion of the Social Security Act. This section of the Social Security Act established funding to states for foster care and adoption services. And with the creation of the Title IV-E program, federal oversight of state child welfare systems was increased, and it required states to implement court review in foster care cases, including demonstrating to courts that state child welfare systems had made reasonable efforts to prevent the removal of children and to reunify in those cases where children had to be removed. So, you know, the Indian Child Welfare Act really preceded this by requiring active efforts to prevent removal of Indian children and active efforts to reunify if children were removed. So the Adoption Assistance and Child Welfare Act is pretty, you know, familiar and could be said to be based on what was developed under the Indian Child Welfare Act, that reasonable efforts in this case for non-Indian families and children had to be made to reunify, had to be made to prevent the removal. In 1997, Congress passed the Adoption and Safe Families Act, and this policy shifted focus of state child welfare systems away from reunifying children with their families, more to a focus on finding permanent homes for children who had to enter foster care. So these regulations really show a shift and a focus on you know, family preservation to this you know, not wanting children to sort of linger in foster care for too long, but rather to move towards a permanent family more quickly. And so these regulations created time limits on how long parents could attempt to reunify with their children prior to children being placed permanently with adoptive or other permanent parents, such as guardians. And then in 2006, Congress passed the Adam Walsh Child Protection and Safety Act, which created a sex offender registry, and it began the requirement for the placement of children in homes only in which the individuals within those homes had completed fingerprint-based background checks. You also have the Indian Child Safety and Family Violence Prevention Act, which also required fingerprint-based background checks for tribes when they're placing children in foster care or adoption. It also required those background checks on employees who were coming in contact with Indian children, and added a component of mandated reporting so that tribes who receive reports of abuse or neglect really do have to report those to law enforcement, child welfare agencies, etc., so that mandated reporting piece also was brought in under this act. And then in 2008, the Fostering Connections to Success and Increasing Adoptions Act, it not only allowed children in foster care to continue to be supported under foster care programs until the age of 21 instead of the age of 18, but this act also provided for the first time direct access for tribes to Title IV-E funding similar to states. And finally, the most recent of the large child welfare legislation passed by Congress in 2018 was the Family First Prevention Services Act, which provides for the first time the use of Title IV-E funds to provide prevention services such as drug and alcohol treatment to parents in order to prevent the removal and placement in foster care of children. Previously, Title IV funding could only be used to provide services to families after their children had already been removed. So this really shows a shift in focus from the federal government to more services preventing the removal rather than only focusing on providing services once children have been removed. So in summary, Title IV-E now exists as the primary funding for both states and tribes to run child welfare programs. As I said, in 2008, the Fostering Connections to Success and Increasing Adoptions Act included tribes finally as eligible recipients of this funding. To access Title IV-E funding, states and tribes must meet various federal laws regulating the use of the funding discussed above. And at present, the Yurok Tribal Child Welfare and Behavioral Health Department is considered a Title IV-E agency, and a lot of the codes and policies are developed in order to meet those federal regulations and allow this important funding to be drawn down by the tribe to provide child welfare services directly. So, Yurok and tribal children in care by the numbers. So looking, Yurok tribal children in state foster care. Each year there can be over 200 Yurok children that are involved in the state child welfare system. In Humboldt County, for example, tribal families are 3.4 times more likely to receive child maltreatment allegations, and they're 4.1 times more likely for those allegations to be substantiated, which would mean that cases would be opened, and in many cases, children are removed from their homes. As of January 1, 2022, there were 133 American Indian and Alaska Native children in care in Humboldt and Del Norte counties, or making up a total of 29% of all children in care, while American Indian and Alaska Native children make up just 7 to 9% of the region's child population, according to census data. So you can see there's quite a huge disproportionate number of tribal children that are involved in state child welfare systems. So, the Yurok tribe has been for a long time working towards establishing its own tribal child welfare system to really move those cases out of county jurisdiction and into tribal jurisdiction. The beginning of this was in 2009. The Yurok tribe signed a Title IV agreement with the state of California to facilitate the pass-through of federal dollars to the tribe for foster care, guardianship, and adoption programs. In 2016, the Yurok tribe had completed all of the negotiations with the state of California on the tribe's child welfare plan, which includes the Yurok Children's Code and the Yurok Title IV-E policies and procedures to meet all of the federal requirements that are required for Title IV-E programs for foster care, guardianship, and adoption, which would finally allow for the dollars to pass through. Since 2016, the tribe has been building the necessary infrastructure to fully implement these important programs, and this foster parent training is one component of that infrastructure development. So the Yurok Tribal Child Welfare and Behavioral Health is really committed to keeping families together. And so the department really aims to ensure that Yurok children are safe and healthy, that they're connected to culture and community, and really have the opportunity to become the future leaders of the tribe. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the Yurok tribe's child welfare and behavioral health programs guiding principles. So the first one is Natatmer, our relations, individuals, families, extended families, and communities are all interconnected. And this is, where the program is really practicing from these principles. Chat now, all, taking care of your family and creating a safe space for your children and the people you love is really guiding the practice, and what, tribal child welfare and behavioral health are focused on helping families to create. And finally, Chakwi Get Nikich Royam is really talking about helping families to show up and learn, to spark their purpose, to strengthen their bonds with their relations and community. And so these are the three main principles guiding Yurok's Tribal Child Welfare and Behavioral Health Program in the efforts they're making to assist children and families. Under the Indian Child Welfare Act, tribes have the right to transfer child welfare cases involving their children from state court jurisdiction to tribal court jurisdiction. These transfer provisions under the Indian Child Welfare Act provide that state courts should transfer these cases unless there is good cause shown to deny the transfer. As the Yurok tribe builds infrastructure, it will seek to transfer child welfare cases from state court to its own jurisdiction. As discussed above, transfers should be granted unless good cause is shown. Good cause may include the tribe denying the transfer, a parent objecting, or other good cause reasons. When a child welfare case is transferred to Yurok jurisdiction, the case will be heard in the Children's Court and governed by the Yurok Children's Code. This is a different set of rules and procedures than the Yurok Family Court, which oversees child custody and child support. So as an Atamar parent, you will be interfacing with the Children's Court rather than the Family Court. So now we're going to do a bit of a child welfare system overview. For the Yurok tribe's child welfare system, the primary focus is to ensure that children are safe, live with their families, or are safe with a permanent family that helps them to stay connected to family, culture, and their tribe. Now we're going to discuss a bit about what is child abuse and neglect. The Yurok Children's Code defines what is considered child abuse and neglect, which includes physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, general neglect, severe neglect, and exploitation. You can find definitions of child abuse and neglect in the Yurok Children's Code. Under state, federal, and tribal law, there are classes of individuals that are considered mandated reporters. Under California law, this mandated reporter provision is called the Child Abuse and Neglect Reporting Act. Under federal law, the Indian Child Safety and Family Violence Prevention Act requires mandated reporting for tribal officials who receive reports of abuse or neglect regarding Indian children. As a foster parent under Yurok law, as an Atamar foster parent, you will be considered a mandated reporter. Other examples of mandated reporters include teachers, public assistance workers, social workers, probation officers, nurses, doctors, and firefighters. As foster parents and mandated reporters, the Yurok tribe's Tribal Child Welfare and Behavioral Health Department is here to help you if you need support in recognizing child abuse or neglect and making necessary reports. Making reports is not an easy process, and so we're going to share this video so you can hear more about what it's like to recognize and file a report.
The reason that CALM is making this video is to help all of us who are mandated reporters, who have contact with kids on a daily basis, coaches and teachers and after-school programs and anyone in contact with a child that sees something. We want that reported because we know it takes the whole community to help end child abuse.
A teenager came to me and she stated that she had been abused by her mother. She was very ashamed about this fact, and therefore she did not want to tell anyone what had happened. Her sister and her were getting into an argument. Mom was a little frustrated and utilized a weapon against her. She was able to come to me, felt confident in doing so, and we were able to share with her that it was not her fault, that she did the right thing in telling us.
And I was a really young teacher when I first moved to Santa Barbara, and I was 21. And there was a young girl who came to school with bruises. And, and I never really asked, even though I suspected something was going on. It haunts me to this day because 15 years later, 20 years later, when she was a young woman, she killed somebody. And I knew that part of that was what was going on when she was in the 3rd grade when I taught her. At that time, there was nothing. There was not mandated reporting. It's such an important key. If I had had the tools, if I had had somebody telling me this is what you look for, and this is how you report, and it's not a big scary thing to do this, I would have been right there for that little girl.
Some of the red flags I've seen over the years is either aggression towards their friends, aggression towards myself, acting out within group situations where I hadn't seen that before. Also, when children withdraw, that's always a red flag for me because little children don't withdraw. Little children want to be part of everything.
If you are a mandated reporter and you suspect abuse of any kind, it's really critical to make the report immediately to Child Welfare Services. That is a requirement under the law. Your initial report should be made by phone as soon as possible. You mustn't wait till the end of the working day or wait until the next day. Do it immediately. Your written report should follow in 36 hours, and that is the law. One thing that's important to remember is the person who receives a disclosure is required to make the report themselves. So it's not enough to say, oh, my supervisor will do it, or I'll ask the principal of the school, or my colleague, or the therapist of the child. The person who receives the disclosure and has suspicion of abuse must make the report.
I help do the word comfort. It always comes to my mind. I help come to them, give them some comforting words. Again, share with them that it's not their fault, that they have the opportunity to share, and that's most important, that they're able to feel comfortable with me and with others that they can trust.
Some of the things to avoid if a child discloses is to get angry yourself and talk about things that you'd like to do to the perpetrator or make negative statements. Because sometimes children have very ambivalent feelings towards the people who abuse them, and that might scare them. It's important not to make any promises or guarantees about what may or may not happen, but also don't interrogate the child. Don't try to extract more information from the child than you actually need to make the report.
There's a couple different ways we respond to child abuse and neglect. The first way is to, if there's imminent danger or immediate danger, we go out right away. The second way we respond is not immediately. There are most of our reports are around general neglect. 60% of our reports that come in the state of California are about neglect. And so for those in the less urgent matters, we have a 10-day window in which we try to make a person-to-person contact with that child. Sometimes, though, the family needs extra support, and so we do have a program called Voluntary Family Maintenance. The family is maintained, the children are in the home with their parents, and all the services that we can think of to prevent abuse and neglect are offered, including calm services for the children and for the parents, substance abuse counseling, mental health treatment, housing, all these references to the outside community that we can offer we link them to the services and case manage it for 6 months to a year.
Kids need safe adults. Even if they're not going to say something, you can see minute changes and sort of wonder, what's that red flag? What is that that's coming up? And, maybe it's not a big thing. Maybe parents just need some support in their households, which is common. But, we need important adults in our kids' lives. It's our job as teachers to be mandated reporters. We sign a contract that says that. It's never easy to make a report. Lots of times we have a relationship with the families, but we never want to see a child hurt, and our job is really to make sure that the children are safe and successful.
At COM, we wish that child abuse didn't exist, but sadly, it does. And those of us that are mandated reporters can really help a child by reporting any suspicion of abuse. It really makes a difference in a child's life and be the path towards healing and a safe and happy life with them.
When making a report, you have to give your name and you have to describe more about what you know that may lead you to believe that the child is being abused or neglected. So for you as an ATOM or foster parents, as of now, who you would be calling to report child abuse or neglect would actually be the Humboldt County Child Welfare Services or Del Norte County Child Welfare Services. Currently, the Yurok tribe does not run its own hotline for receiving reports of abuse or neglect. But when Del Norte or Humboldt counties receive reports of abuse or neglect that involve a Yurok child, they do notify the Yurok Tribal Child Welfare and Behavioral Health Department that a report has been received and invite the tribal social workers to participate in co-investigations of those reports of abuse or neglect. So to describe more about the child welfare system overview, usually all cases really do begin with a report of abuse or neglect. So we're going to follow that report through the process so that you can understand more about the child welfare system. So once the report is made, it's going to either go through an investigation or it's going to be what they call referred out, usually to community-based organizations that can provide support to the family. So because county agencies and the Yurok tribe share jurisdiction over children involved in the child welfare systems in Humboldt and Del Norte counties, the tribe, when notified of a report, may choose to do one of these three things. They may choose to bring the investigation directly under the tribe's jurisdiction and complete that investigation on their own. They may choose to do a co-investigation with the county, or the receiving party of the referral, so Humboldt or Del Norte counties, may make a decision, a shared decision with the tribal social workers to evaluate out the report to other agencies, as they may determine that there's no evidence of child abuse or neglect that they're finding from the report, and therefore does not need further. So now we're going to go through and show exactly how the process works from the hotline call. So once reports are made, the child welfare system response includes a number of different paths. For example, when a report is filed, first the child welfare system must decide if the information provided actually gives evidence that a child may in fact be experiencing or abuse or neglect. If it's determined that the report makes a credible demonstration of abuse or neglect, the system then has to decide if the report indicates that an investigation must occur, and if that needs to happen immediately or if that can happen within 5 to 7 days. If a report is investigated, then the child welfare system must also determine if the children can remain safely in their homes, or if safety threats presented mean that the children must be removed. If the child is removed, the court will then hold a detention hearing in which the child welfare agency has to demonstrate the facts supporting the need for removal. If the child is not removed, but the child welfare agency determines there's a risk to the safety of the child, an in-home case may be initiated. In these cases, children remain at home with their families, but may voluntarily or be court-ordered to participate in services that will help to mitigate the risks that the child welfare investigation has identified. All counties in California have emergency response programs that receive reports of abuse or neglect, that assess the need for investigations, and then also completing those investigations. Some of the questions that guide the work of the emergency response programs are: is the child in imminent danger? Or what is the risk of maltreatment? They also have to assess whether the suspected abuse meets the legal definition, and if an in-person response is required, and if so, how quickly. County child welfare agencies also are required to inquire about a child's Native American ancestry and to inform tribes if they have a potential eligible or enrolled member that is involved in a hotline call. So they use these tools called standard decision-making tools. No, that's not right. All counties in California have emergency response programs that receive reports of abuse or neglect, that assess the need for investigations, and then also complete investigations. Some of the questions that guide the work of emergency response programs are: is the child in imminent danger? Specifically, can they stay in their homes? What is the risk of maltreatment in the future? So maybe they're safe at present, they can stay in their homes, but there's a high risk that maltreatment could happen in the future, and therefore the system needs to initiate services for the family. They also need to really look at, does the suspected abuse meet the legal definition? Also looking at, is an in-person response required? So do they need to actually go straight to the house to investigate? And do they need to do that quickly? Do they have to do that immediately, or can that be done within 10 days? Every child welfare agency does also need to do inquiry into whether or not the child may have Native American ancestry. That's a protection under the Indian Child Welfare Act. And if they determine that a child may have Native American ancestry, they are supposed to identify the tribe and contact the tribe to determine if the child is a member or eligible for membership. If a tribe confirms that a child is eligible or enrolled, there's a number of different things that could happen, but the child welfare agency is supposed to collaborate with the tribe to determine many of the answers to these sort of key questions. In California, they use tools under the structured decision-making suite of tools. They are supposed to collaborate in the process of using those tools to determine how soon, whether or not to investigate, how soon, and what will come after that investigation. Most referrals received by child welfare agencies are not investigated. In fact, under 10% of reports are investigated. Most often reports received are evaluated out, which means the family is provided information on community-based services that might assist the family with any challenges they are facing, but the child welfare agency does not go to the home to investigate or do any further action besides providing referrals to the family. The idea is if, a family has been brought to the attention of the agency, there may be some challenges that they are facing that community services could, provide early intervention to assist them so that it doesn't rise to the level in the future of needing, child welfare services specifically. So child welfare agencies have to navigate a number of different decision points and in safety assessments. They're looking at determining their response. So once we receive that referral, are we going to go out to do further investigation, or does the information we have indicate that a family may be just experiencing challenges and there is not actual abuse or neglect going on? If they proceed to do in-person investigation, they really have to do a safety assessment and a safety determination. So they need to determine, can the child stay at home safely? And if not, do we need to remove and place in foster care? On the other hand, maybe there's a risk, but the safety assessment doesn't really show you that the child must be immediately removed. Then perhaps there are other services or, safety plans that can be put in place. So that's another decision point. When a child is removed, the next decision point is, where will the child go? So the child needs a placement. The referral disposition. So at the end of an investigation, they have to determine what types of services will be provided to the family. So, for example, in case planning, they're really looking at, if a child was removed, what services can we put in place to support the family to reunify? If the child was not removed, they're really going to be looking at the services that can be put in place to prevent the need for future removal. So to really enhance the family's capability to provide safety. From that point forward, you're really looking at, with these services in place, can the child reunify with their family? So when can a child return and be safe? Also, courts have to determine at what point it's no longer in the child's best interest to keep trying to reunify with the parents, and rather the time is to turn to finding a permanent alternative family for the child. Child welfare agencies also need to figure out, when can they actually close a case. Sometimes that means, a child is reunified with their parents. The agency may provide further services for another 6 months, just sort of providing some supervision and support of the family after the child has been returned. And then, determining if they can close the case. Sometimes that may be, the child is safely returned to the home, and the case can be closed. Sometimes the child is put into a permanent family, an alternate permanent family. And then you're looking at, when is the child settled enough with that permanent family that the agency can step away. So under Yurok law, only children determined to be what's called a child in need of aid are provided child welfare services. So to be determined a child in need of aid, the Yurok Tribal Court will have to make court findings. The findings in particular, when a child is removed from the home, the court must find that it is contrary to the welfare of the child to remain in their home. This is a federal requirement of a finding in court, and it must be done at the first hearing. If the court is providing services, or the court is providing supervision over the family, but the child is remaining in the home, the court will make court findings that it's contrary to the welfare of the child, or the child is at risk, the situation is at risk for the child to be contrary to the welfare to remain in the home, and therefore the court is providing supervision of the family while the child is remaining in the home. To determine this, the court must find by a preponderance of the evidence that the child has been abused or neglected. So preponderance of the evidence is a legal term, meaning it is more likely true than not that the child has been abused or neglected, or is at risk of being abused or neglected, and that the child is in danger of physical, mental, or emotional harm. So these are some of the findings that the court will make. You can see that the level of evidence is a little bit different in the first hearings. They're different than what you think of in criminal court. You know, there's sort of a lower standard of evidence that needs to be presented to the court in the first hearings to determine if initiation of the court supervision of the family will begin. Another piece that is required by Yurok law, the Yurok Child Welfare and Behavioral Health Department must show the court that prior to removal, they provided the family with what is called active efforts. And some of these active efforts you can see here listed on the slide. They may include identifying family supports that will assist the parents to, will prevent the removal or assist the parents to reunify. The department should be actively offering the parents services that are identified in the Children's Code. They may be initiating a family conferencing plan. So this is, you know, a meeting in which extended family and other supports come together and develop a plan on how the child can safely remain at home, or what kind of services can be offered for the child to, if removed, go back home. It's also, you know, actively assisting the parents in using community-based support services. So that could include mental health counseling, that could include alcohol and drug treatment, that may include parenting classes, depending on what the needs of the family are that are, you know, really leading to the potential harm to the child. The department will also be working hard to place siblings in the same home, and if, you know, siblings are separated, that they're ensuring those visits are happening. Also, not just with siblings, but also ensuring that visits are happening with grandparents and other extended family members. And the department has to document to the court all the actions that they have taken in this regard. So they have to both show that they've done these active efforts to prevent removal. But if a child has been removed, they also need to show that they've done these active efforts to reunify the child with their family. So the term active efforts was initially identified under the Indian Child Welfare Act and is required of county agencies when they have removed a child that is identified as an Indian child. The tribes, you know, the Indian Child Welfare Act does not apply to tribal proceedings. So the Yurok tribe is not actually required to offer active efforts, but the Yurok Tribal Council included in their approval of policies that, you know, the agency, the department, Tribal Child Welfare and Behavioral Health Department will provide that higher level of support to prevent removal and to reunify families. So we are getting close to the end of this module. In module 2, the next part of this training plan, you will receive more information about these different types of services that are provided under the Yurok Child Welfare System and within the Yurok Tribal Court System. So there are cases in which, you know, families may be provided voluntary services. Those are called voluntary family maintenance. There are cases in which the court will be involved and will supervise the family but the child still remains at home. And so that is called a court family maintenance case. The family reunification services are really when a child is removed and you're actively trying to assist the parents in overcoming the barriers that led to the removal. There are cases and services called permanency planning, in which children are really this reunification has not worked, and that you're moving towards really seeking a permanent alternate family for the child. And for some children who remain in foster care, by the time they're 18, they may choose to remain in foster care in what is called extended foster care. And under that, children are, young people who turn adult at age 18 are provided with continued services until the age of 21. So as you proceed through the modules of this training, you'll receive more information about these different types of cases and the services associated with them. So before we close, we just wanted to share a message from a current Yurok foster parent about what being a foster parent means. Also, for your information, Humboldt County created a recruitment video for foster parents, really seeking more Native foster parents. And then we're going to share a short video about what entering foster care means from a youth perspective. So here we go.
A little up and down. There's good, there's bad. But the experience overall has shown me how to build a little bit more connection with these youth and the importance of having somebody they can count on and rely on has been rewarding. My favorite moments are when they're able to really apply the skills that they learned in my house, boundaries, not living in so much chaos, and being able to build that in their own lives and going forward, either being reunified with their mom and dad in a safe place and keeping the connection with them, whether it was their own house or through extended foster care, or just knowing that they can have a different life than what they maybe have grown up in. There's a lot of challenges. Just organizing services, doctor's appointments, realizing that what their crisis may be, maybe not what I view as a crisis, and really taking a step back and seeing it. Teenagers, everything's a crisis to them, which means the things that they find being super, super high in emotion, where I have to take a step back and realize where they're coming from, the trauma that they've had, the life that they've experienced within the system of child welfare, and really not, what's the word? Trying to validate their feelings and know that it's okay. I think is the biggest challenge, and the ups and downs and the high behaviors, and being able to really learn how, when they don't have any grounding techniques or tools for their coping. I wish I would have known, especially with the youth I have now, of being able to take a step back and know that more of the trauma that she's had, so that I could help her navigate that. Because since I've had her, there's been more of like just random stuff coming out, like criminal court, boyfriends, just knowing some of the background, more background on it. As a support, my role in reunification is I'm here as a temporary caregiver for some of the kids that come in, and they're going to end up going home to their parents, and having that connection to the parents is important to me. which is why when I had a 3-year-old Yurok child in my home, we had the birthday parties here and mom and dad were welcome to come, and which was cleared by child welfare. Dad did supervised visits here instead of at the facility once, you know, it was safe and he was drug testing. And just being a part of the process for unifying and having a relationship with both parents when it was safe for the child to do that, determined by child welfare. But my role is here to support in the best I can to not make it so traumatic for the kid and for the families to know that there's no judgment. And I'm here to support them in their healing and let them and not take their role away from them, and can have them participate in decisions like with daycares and childcare providers and school decisions and medical decisions, and having them there for those and calling, whether it was on Zoom or a phone call, so that they can learn the skills too, and how he's was being, what's the word I'm looking for? Raised for that temporary time, so that maybe when he went home, they could have similar schedules and routines. So.
The number one reason why kids come into care, why they're removed from their parents, is because they're unsafe. All the interviews that we do, when we interview kids, when we interview parents, and we're asking questions that really get down to, is this child physically safe? Are their basic needs met? Are they not? Is the parent's substance abuse, if that's a factor, impacting their ability to parent?
So I grew up in LA County, and as far back as 5 is the first time I remember child welfare being involved in my life and social workers coming out to the house and the school to talk to us. So I always kind of had social workers involved, but when I was 13 is when I entered foster care for the first time. And it was shocking, and at the same time it was relief. Because there was a lot of abuse at home and a lot of violence and addiction. And so to have this opportunity to get out of that was equally good and equally painful.
The children in foster care are all of our responsibility to care for, not only the department as an entity who's responsible for the protection of children, but we all as a community have a piece in raising children who are the most vulnerable. Can't just be an agency, because we don't necessarily raise children the best. We need our partners, community members, people who want to really ensure that our community stays the community and children stay here, that we all have a stake and a vested interest in ensuring our children are healthy and safe.
When I was in foster homes and in the community, what was so glaringly obvious and painful to me was that I didn't fit the social expectation. I didn't have parents. Everything at school is family oriented. Everything on TV is family oriented, because that's our culture. What I hope though is that every child that has the unfortunate experience of entering foster care is that they find homes where people treat them like they were their own child.
I think the drive and what makes me passionate about advocating for the foster system is the need for homes and for quality homes. That's a drive and a passion of mine to see change, to see things get easier for foster parents when working with the social workers and getting services for kids, but also advocating for these kids to have quality homes within our community and not to just settle for a bed, but to really try and match these kids with families that can do the best for these kids.
After we got through that initial, hey, this is my new home and you're my new family, it just took right off from there. It was very natural. In social services, there's an absence of men being a role player in the whole thing. And so that's sort of the weak link in our families too, you know, to have a functional mother and father in the home are not something you always see. I really enjoyed that opportunity to give to a young boy something that was given to me at one time, and I was mentored by other men in my tribal community that were not my blood family, and I really respect that.
The most challenging part about being a foster parent is the unknown of what the child or what has happened to the child's life until it comes to you. The emotions are there and you don't know. It's a 2 or 3 o'clock phone call and you don't know what's going on, you know.
And for me, as far as when kids first come into our home, you know, they're just scared. They don't know what's going on. They don't know where their mom and dad is. Sometimes they just want to be cuddled. Other times they just want you to leave them alone. They, you know, it's on their terms. You know, they'll fall asleep where they want to. You know, unfortunately, kids don't have the luxury of coming into foster care, you know, at 9 to 5. You know, a lot of our calls have been emergency placements, you know, in the middle of the night, first thing in the morning.
I think one of the most challenging is coming to grips of the attachment and knowing very well that they're going to be, hopefully would be going home. A lot of them can't talk for themselves. They are pretty guarded in that sense that you have to infiltrate their wall to gain that trust. And sometimes it takes a while. It takes a long time.
The most challenging aspect is all the county red tape. I know that they're there to support children, and I know that they have a job to do and that they're overworked. Definitely what kept us going through it would be the relationship we established with the little guy. It was watching the mom make good choices. I think it helped her to understand what our intentions were, and it helped her to see that it was a benefit for him to know us and her. And I think that made the transition a little bit easier for him, which was the goal.
So in our county, like many other states and nationally, but particularly so in Humboldt County, Native American children are far overrepresented in our child welfare population. 6 to 7% of the county is representative of Native American of the whole entire population, while 39% of the children in care identify as Native American. That's a significant disproportionality. So it's really important that tribal children are placed in their community and with tribal caregivers.
As cultural, traditional people, one of the things that we sort of live by is that you give back and you have a responsibility to care for not just your own, but care for those beyond your own circle. And I think the most rewarding part was that taking care of a foster child was kind of an extension of our traditional values. If we touch their lives for 5 minutes, we're going to know them forever, especially in a small community like ours. I think in the long run, that's the best possible outcome for him. I feel blessed that that was the case for our families.
The most rewarding is just to watch these kids grow up to become who they are. It's they're new characters, they're new parts of life. You can just see them just transform into being little people and having fun and just doing their own things, and you just guide them the best you can.
We had 2 years ago our son that was nonverbal, and then to see him become comfortable and secure and able to trust what his environment was, we laughed because the first word that he put together was piece of bread. And so I said, go get the bread, give him whatever bread he wants. So there's definitely those milestones that you hit, that you see, that it's like, that's what keeps us going.
I think if anybody's even remotely interested, they should just ask the questions, because I think it's going to be easier than they think. And it's not to say that it's easy 100% of the time. It's definitely challenging at times, but there's a lot of people there that are kind of carrying your shoulders with you as you're going through the process.
Definitely look into it. If you have any interest at all, I mean, there's other ways, you know, that you can help support foster parents. Even if you can't physically foster them, there's always ways to help. We really like being a foster parent. We love being foster parents. We wanted to be parents for a long time. This is how we've chosen to do it. And there's days that it's really hard, but the days that are really good outweigh them. There's so many people in the community that really can do it. Go to an orientation, see what it's about, and it's rewarding. I mean,
there's so many kids that need a safe place to be, that need a home.
Taken from place to place and being sent to a whole new different city and a whole new different family and people that you've never met before. It's a really confusing experience. You just feel torn away from your community. It's like, just imagine that you were going to work one day and it's just a normal day and you're on your way to work and everything is as it's supposed to be, and you watered your dog and you drank your coffee and you tell your kids goodbye and you go to work, and then the police show up at your job and they say, okay, we're moving you to a totally different city and you don't know anybody, and you can't call your family and you can't call any of your friends, and you need to leave your phone here and you can't take any of your stuff with you. We'll figure that out later. And they just pick you up and they transport you to a totally different place and then tell you to just wait in this room for a little while because we're going to figure things out. And then they come and bring you a little sack luncheon, and then just a few more hours and we're going to figure this out. Just here, play with this little toy. Okay, put this little ring on a hook. And then they send you to these really well-meaning people but you have no idea who they are, and their house smells different, and maybe they have a dog and they have hardwood floors. You've only ever had carpet. Like, everything about the experience is alien to you. And all you want is to be able to contact the people that you have a bond with. It's a very disrupting experience. And in a lot of ways, it's a traumatic experience because all of these things are unexpected. And suddenly everything in your world that you felt was safe and secure and concrete is not. And having those ideas shattered is really difficult, especially as a child, because you need that security. You need to know that here's my bed, I can come home to it, and this is where it's going to be, and that's going to be okay. Or here's my mom, and no matter what, she's going to be there for me, and I can just call her and she'll show up, and that's going to be okay. When you can't believe that anymore, it starts to make you question, well, what can you believe? Who can you trust? What is a for sure thing? You begin to stop valuing certain things. You stop valuing relationships because they're not concrete and they're not going to be there forever. And you stop investing yourself in certain things. And all of a sudden, stability isn't really important to you. Having goals isn't important to you. You are concerned with, where are you going to sleep tonight? Are you going to be safe? Who are these people? Doing a simple thing like taking a shower in a stranger's home is a very disconcerting experience. So the more that you get moved around, the more trauma that you endure in that. Every single move is a traumatic experience. So you can see the consequences later on. And really, you can see the consequences pretty early on. As a child who's in foster care, I exhibited signs of not being able to trust other people, of not wanting to connect. I had some really antisocial behavior. I also had a deep dislike for government agencies, for the police, for social workers. Like, I did not believe that they were on my team, because when I'm telling you that this is what I need and you're just not listening and you're saying, well, this is what we feel you need, I can't trust you any longer. As a child, you do not have the capacity to forward think. You are not able to. And scientifically, your brain isn't even wired to do that yet. And so the decisions that you're making are pure emotional. When you're dealing with a traumatic situation and when the people around you don't have the tools to help you deal with that, the decisions that you're making are pure instinctive. And so I just know that if I have this incredible amount of sadness and this incredible amount of fear, and I don't know what to do with it, well, maybe I should just run away. Maybe I should do drugs. Maybe I should get in fights. Maybe I should cuss out my foster parents. There's all kinds of different things that happen. None of those things were planned. All of those things were unintended consequences because I didn't know how to deal with the original emotions that I was facing. And so I really just want people to understand that these kids just need help. I don't understand how there's so much funding for foster care benefits, for adoption benefits, for emergency shelters. There's so much funding for that, but there's no funding for family preservation. And had my mom just had a little bit of help, had she have had enough money to buy her own vehicle, had she had enough money to relocate herself from an abusive situation, had she not had to depend on men in the first place for any kind of financial stability, I don't believe that she would have made some of the decisions that she would have made. I don't believe that she would have struggled as a mother, because my mom is a good mom. she just had some hardships and she had nobody to help her. And so I don't understand how there's so much funding to take us away, but there's no funding to keep us there.